Governor-elect Moore has an impressive resume. He's a former investment banker, an author, a television producer, a Rhodes Scholar, an Army officer, and a White House fellow. But guess what? This is going to be his first political position. Mike, how will he achieve the aspirational issues that Governor-elect Moore discussed in his campaign, addressing poverty, improving education and equity, reducing unfair incarcerations, and increasing the minimum wage? That's a pretty full plate.
It is a pretty full plate. One of the things I've been impressed with, though, is this team's ability so far to really keep the plate fairly tight. I think one of the things that happens when people get elected is they say a lot of things at the beginning, and then they get in office and they want to even do that much more. And one of the things I've heard them really try to learn from the transition with Governor O'Malley there was a lot of work. They created reams and reams of information about how all of the things they wanted to do. And the more team now is really trying to stay very focused, and they've set up a series of working groups, only 5 of them, and they're focused on very key areas, and each of those working groups is really trying to stay focused on just a small number of issues, and have been admonished to not be able to expand those issues significantly. You can refine them, you can make them clearer, but really trying to stay focused on those things that Governor-elect Moore and Lieutenant Governor-elect Miller talked about on the campaign, and stay very much within that box, because and to identify clear metrics that they can show progress to those goals and activities. And I think that's really important to understand, that you're not going to boil the ocean, that you've got to be able to be very clear, you've got to be very specific, and you've got to be able to measure what those outcomes are. And at least at the first steps show that the team understands that the governor-elect understands that, and that's where they're trying to move, in the direction they're trying to move.
So, Laurie, let's take a look at the flip side of this, because as Jason Buckle, the Maryland House of Delegate Minority Leader, has said, Governor-elect Moore has never been in public office before. He's certainly never had to do public budgeting before. And it's easy to promise the interest groups the world. And if the money was out there for every purpose, he'd do it all. Is Moore going to have a problem adjusting to the realities of working with the General Assembly and balancing a budget?
Well, the first thing that he'll have to adjust to is his own salary, because he was used to making over $900,000 a year working for a nonprofit, which was, wow, what an enormous salary he was making. And his salary will be something like $180,000 as governor.
Yeah, but he gets free housing, Laurie.
That's true. That's true. But that's going to be a big adjustment for him. But he's used to working with hedge fund investors and big donors like Oprah and George Soros through the Robin Hood nonprofit that he ran. And that organization has been criticized for lack of transparency. So he's going to have a big adjustment working in the government now, because we Marylanders, we demand transparency. And I think that he's going to have to realize he's going to have to explain everything he's doing and make sure that everyone has input. It's going to be tough. And this bureaucracy of the government is something he's not used to. I think Aruna Miller will be a huge asset for him, because she comes with a lot of experience as working as a delegate, and she has great experience in the transportation area as a transportation engineer. So she and a number of other people he can rely on to understand how this government works. But in a few years, we're going to have recreational marijuana in the budget, where we're going to be getting more revenue. That's going to be possibly over $150 million added to the budget that he gets to play with. So the challenge is going to be really, how do you create a sustainability budget that won't just feed on the stimulus money that we're getting now, and all the other stimulus funds and rebates and things that are coming in right now. It's not going to be easy to sustain.
Mike, I want to go to you, because just today was released a draft report by the Kirwan Commission talking about educational goals and how to achieve them in our public schools. And I didn't have time to read through the 185-page report, but the key points that came out loud and clear was there was a dovetailing between the governor-elect's desire for pre-K education and the draft proposal. So is this something we're going to see, and how are they going to pay for it?
Well, I think early care and education is going to be critical. And even in Montgomery County, there's been a real focus on this, that we know that the sooner we can get to children and and start to get them into a system and provide them educational resources, the more successful they are. And we know that more than 50% of our students aren't reading at the third grade level when they get to third grade. And they're not prepared to get to kindergarten. So the reality is we've got to be able to make that investment. And I think that given the resources that we have, as Laurie was indicating, right now, the state's coffers continue to be flush. I think people need to be mindful of the fact that that doesn't last forever, and we've got to come up with a sustainable way to address it. But I think one of the first great steps from an educational perspective will be to address early care and education, both from a student perspective and then also from a business perspective, because it's a business that has been decimated as a result of the pandemic. And so the ability to try and bolster that to support our children, I think, is going to be a great step forward.
Laurie, we've talked about this endlessly, and you've served on the governor's education board previously. Is it really about the money, or is it about educational focus? And we've talked a lot about how our children aren't being taught properly. Is throwing money at the solution to the problem?
Well, that's one of the problems I think that we're going to have with Wes Moore as governor instead of a Republican governor who would have been open to new ideas like charter schools, which I think Baltimore supports. Baltimore parents really want charter schools, but we're going to be back to the same idea of throwing money and giving more money to teachers. They all deserve a high salary, but the gap is huge right now. It's much bigger than before. The NAEP results, as I said last time I was on here, are dismal. I mean, our state did much worse than other states. It's not just that the pandemic hit us hard. It hit us harder than most of the other states. We're like number 42 in 8th grade math. That's terrible. 42. That's we've got to, in pre-K, advancing pre-K to all people. How are we going to afford that? And we can't even get K through 12 right. We've got to get that right. And I think we need to focus on helping parents, giving them the skills to helping them have the skills to know how to read to their child, how to help their child in school. That's where I'd like to see more effort.
So, Mike, I was going to ask you about, the political appointments that are so far been made, but, in general, what are the tea leaves we're getting? And how do we interpret what's going on with the Moore administration?
What I've seen so far is I think there's a real effort to both pull together a team that is reflective of the state and how the state operates. So pulling people geographically, pulling people from a variety of cultures and backgrounds. And I think they're doing a nice job of that. To the point the question you had earlier, he's not been in a political office before, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. In fact, oftentimes I think that brings a different perspective. But the important part is to recognize that you haven't been there and to surround yourself with people who understand how that operates. And so far from his direct appointments, he has folks who he is comfortable working with, and he's worked with in other places, so they know how he operates and the decisions he makes. And also bring in people who have an understanding of the government and political dynamic, both locally within the state and statewide, and how that impacts other places. And so I think the first steps have been strong and significant.
Well, Mike, you're going to have the last word on this, except for my comment here, which is, Laurie, charter schools are great, but what we really need is a voucher system. We need parents to be able to take their dollars they're paying for tax-supported schools and take them to the school of their choice. And if we do that, we would have a winning government coalition. Now,
we have a boost program. We need to increase the boost. That's
all right. Well, we got to go to break.